Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. Hamas hands over the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. The group says the remains include 3 members of the Bibas family and alleges they were killed in an Israeli airstrike in November of last year. Meanwhile, Israeli forces report the killing of 3 Palestinian militants in the occupied West Bank, heightening tensions in the region. US President Donald Trump labels Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator and calls for elections in Ukraine, drawing rebuke from other world leaders. This comes while Zelensky accuses the US president of falling for Russian disinformation. Meanwhile, a US envoy has arrived in Kiev as Russian airstrikes cut power to nearly 160,000 residents in Odessa. Israel confirms it has carried out airstrikes in southern Lebanon despite prior withdrawal plans. 1 person has been killed in the latest Israeli strike, increasing concerns over further cross-border hostilities. The fragile Gaza ceasefire continues as Hamas handed over the dead bodies of 4 Israeli captives. These bodies include members of the Bibas family, a lady and her 2 children, who were kidnapped from the deadly October 7th attacks. Israeli Defense Forces have confirmed that the Red Cross has received the dead bodies. Shortly before the bodies were transferred, Hamas released a statement reiterating its claim that these hostages were killed in Israeli strikes. Subsequently, Israel's health ministry has said it will now conduct the identification process to identify, but not just identify, but establish the cause of death of the hostages. As per report, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu considered participating in the proceedings late last night. However, it decided that he would not attend. Thank you for joining us. We are joined by Daniel Cameron, former diplomat located in Tel Aviv. And we're also joined by Nizar Ghanem, Middle East expert, joining us from Beirut. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. My first question is for you, Daniel Cameron. How is the Israeli public reacting to the return of these bodies? It's obviously a very, very sad day. Israel were hoping that these hostages would still be alive, and bad news has unfortunately come. How are people feeling in Israel, Daniel?
Really hard to transmit through a Zoom conversation how deeply sad, how engulfed the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, not only the families, are engulfed in a very somber, sad, tragic atmosphere today when half an hour ago, the Red Cross has handed over the coffins of the 4 hostages who killed during the atrocities of the 7th of October. The whole country is really feeling, it's like a popular, if I may say, a popular, non-official, coming from the grassroots mourning day in this country.
Daniel, I want to go further into this. Obviously, it's a very, very sad day in Israel. Hamas claims that these hostages were killed in an Israeli airstrike very early on in the war, in November of 2023. How likely is it for this to be true? Obviously, we can't speculate, but and what would it mean for the perceptions of Hamas's ability to shape international perceptions of this conflict?
Well, unfortunately, in a very cruel way, the Hamas terrorist organization is using today and is using all the days in which hostages were repatriated to Israel for a show of propaganda. And by the way, there is a clear decision today by all channels of communication not to broadcast the ceremonies, the joyous ceremonies on the Palestinian side during this the transfer of hostages, unfortunately dead hostages coming back home. a joyous music is sung in the streets in the ceremony itself, and Hamas is really using it. And probably, and maybe, the declaration that they were killed from Israeli airstrike might be part of this propaganda. This will be established in the forensic tests that will be conducted later today.
Daniel, what does it mean for the future of these negotiations? Obviously, Israel are expecting to receive 6 live hostages on Sunday. How do you think that the autopsy will, depending on the results of the autopsy, how do you think that this will be viewed in the broader scope of the whole ceasefire deal?
Well, the broader scope is that after ending the first phase, which will be concluded this Saturday with the return of 6 living hostages, and then there will be one more point at the end of which the first phase of the exchange, as it is called, will be over, and then we have to go as agreed upon as quickly as possible for the second phase. I'd like to remind your audience that after the first phase will be over, there will still be around, we don't know exactly, 20 living hostages in captivity in the Gaza tunnels, deprived of food, of medicine, of water, of fresh air, of daylight. They don't see daylight, and they have to come home safely as soon as possible. And there are more than 30 dead hostages who should be coming home for proper burial. So we should, and I'd like to commend President Trump. Without the pressure of President Trump, nothing would have happened. Through him and through his envoy, Steve Witkoff. And I'd like to call to say something that is almost in consensus in Israel. We have to go to the second stage of negotiations and bring all the hostages back. Bring them now.
And Daniel, is that the common consensus in Israel is that this because obviously last week there were talks of the possibility of hostilities starting once again. Obviously, this is an extremely sad day, given hopes that these hostages were still going to be alive. But you're saying that the general consensus is Israel is that it is absolutely crucial that the second stage is reached.
Well, there are nuances, and the nuances cannot be ignored. There is Israeli internal politics, and I won't go into this. This is too complicated. But I think that in the last week, and again, I'd like to point out President Trump's pressure to this effect. Politics are still there. And again, I'm not a representative of the Israeli government, and I can give you another angle of things. But the way, and you should see the pictures coming from the roads in Israel, the bridges, the intersections, all full of Israeli citizens receiving our brothers and sisters and kids and elderly back home, dead or alive. This is really a popular, total Israeli feeling that those brothers of ours should be back home as soon as possible now.
I wanted to briefly talk about the regional actors and the organisations that are helping keeping this ceasefire going. I mean, you've obviously got the Red Cross, which has facilitated this transfer. How significant is their role in making sure these negotiations are going as smooth as they can? Also, how does this development impact regional actors such as Qatar and Egypt, who are involved in mediation? As well, obviously, you have brought up Donald Trump several times. What do you think, Daniel, about these?
Well, the Red Cross has been an appointment for the general Israeli public feeling was that the Red Cross could, during those 15 months, in locating the hostages, in knowing about their whereabouts, in passing medicine, and being sure, like it happens in all over the world, that the Red Cross has a role. There is some misunderstanding probably of the role of the Red Cross, but I think the Red Cross should have and could have done better. Another organization you have not mentioned is the UN or the UN family. A big disappointment. This is really an unprecedented situation of hostages taking citizens. No, only few are soldiers, citizens taking from their bed at 6 a.m. in the morning. And the UN, with all the machinery and organizations and agency, has hardly done anything. And one should ask himself, why is it so? And the third organization I'd like to mention is UNRWA, an organization that in the 50s was supposed to deal and solve and help the Palestinian refugees, has become, unfortunately, in the last few years, an organization infiltrated by Hamas terrorists and has become totally illegitimate.
Daniel, we've been joined by Ali Emma Bushback, independent Palestinian researcher. Ali, thank you for joining us. We are obviously discussing the current exchange, the current handover of the Israeli hostage remains back over to Israel. Hamas claims that these hostages were killed in strikes from Israel early in November 2023. How likely is this to be true, do you think?
Thank you for having me. It's a broken-hearting to that hand over the death body for the Israelis. Obviously, this is a grief for the Palestinian and Israeli as well as, in my opinion, that it's a sad news for both community, that Israel and Palestine, to lose a human being and to lose the soul of the people. Putting allegation on the Israelis also, Hamas, as usually said, that Israel tried Israel is deliberately targeting the captive or the hostages. So it's Hamas putting the blame on the Israeli side, which I guess this is the life of the people or the captive. It's under the responsibility of Hamas. It's not only for Israel, as well as there is so many accidents happen between Hamas and Israel. Like there's more than Israeli captive who got killed by Israelis fired in Shija'iyya and many places. And also there is one, I guess 5 captives who got killed in a Nusayrat neighborhood during the Israeli tried to release them from Hamas. So this news, it's really breaking the heart of both community, Palestinian and Israel, and it's a sad thing. And also, despite that, everyone, organization, international organization and Red Cross, they criticize the handover show that Hamas trying to flexing its muscle. Hamas trying to show their power when they are handing over the death body or the captive to the Red Crosses. So, yeah.
I wanted to talk about, obviously, Sunday is going to roll around soon, and there is going to be an exchange of hopefully live hostages, six of them. This moment is obviously marked by grief, but how does this balance between hope and tragedy influence negotiations and diplomacy in this fragile ceasefire?
As I mentioned before, that unfortunately Benjamin Netanyahu is not serious about the second phase of negotiation, that it's going to be very soon, according to the spokesman of the Qatar, who's mediating the negotiation between Hamas and Israel. But on the ground, people are optimists. So they are holding any hope for the end, to move forward to end the war and end this kind of conflict and restructuring Gaza and rebuilding this. As well as this is the release or the exchange between Hamas and Israel is a part of the first phase agreement between Hamas and Israel that signed in 19th of January. Hopefully, they will reach to some solution. Despite it, it seems that the Israeli community also fragmented in this situation. Some group they are supporting to end the war and not return to the war, and the far right wing in Israel who's more radical, who's asking about to return to the war and go back to the war. So we are in the landscape of fragmenting situation in Israeli community, but ultimately we must be supporting the peace. We must supporting the calm in between Palestinian and Israel. The citizen in both communities, Israeli or Palestinian, they are agreed to peace to live in peaceful environment.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Daniel Cameron and Ali M. Bushback, for joining us. We will now move on to some other news from across the world. Brazil's former right-wing leader, Jair Bolsonaro, has come out stating that he is a victim of Silva's authoritarian regime. This comes a day after the leader and 34 others were charged with a coup attempt. This goes back to the Brazilian election of 2022. Here is a full report.
Brazil's former conservative president Jair Bolsonaro has now accused the ruling party of an authoritarian regime, which is concocting accusations against him. This comes after he was charged with orchestrating a coup bid. The 5 charges against the accused include the crimes of coup d'état, the attempt to violently abolish the democratic rule of law, and armed criminal organization. If found guilty, Bolsonaro could face up to 40 years in prison. Various lawmakers have also responded to the charges, including Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who has talked about his faith in the judicial system.
Ora, se na hora que o juiz for julgar, chegar à conclusão que eles são culpados, eles terão que pagar pelo erro que cometeram.
Que não estamos aqui uma questão de disputa política, vingança, nosso opositor. Não. O que houve é muito sério. Tem a ver com democracia.
The charges are based on an 884-page police report accusing the 69-year-old of masterminding a plot to prevent President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva from taking office after the 2022 elections. According to investigators, the alleged coup plan failed because Brazil's top military leaders did not support it. Bolsonaro is described in the indictment as the head of a criminal organization which attempted to prevent, in a coordinated manner, the result of the 2022 presidential elections from being fulfilled. According to prosecutors, the final attempt to stop Lula from taking power was an attack by Bolsonaro supporters on the presidential palace, Congress and Supreme Court in Brasilia on January 8, 2023. The plan, called Yellow and Green Dagger, was supposed to be implemented on December 15, 2022, but failed. In June 2023, Bolsonaro was also disqualified from running for office until 2030, after making unsubstantiated claims that the electoral system was unreliable. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some news updates from across North America. The United States has designated 8 Latin American criminal and drug trafficking groups as global terrorist organizations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said in a filed notice that the groups are a risk. He says they have committed acts of terrorism that threaten the security of the country's nationals. The names of the 8 groups have also been mentioned in the notice. The US Secretary of State of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has ordered a swift review of the Pentagon budget. Reports say that he is seeking cuts worth 8% of total spending over the next 5 years. He intends to fund higher priority defense projects and support warfighters. 17 specific areas will be exempt from cuts, including nuclear modernization and wand-of-way attack drones. U.S. District Judge Leo Sorokin has blocked U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order seeking to terminate birthright citizenship. The challengers have argued that Trump's executive order violates the citizenship clause. By giving this judgment, Sorokin joins federal judges in Maryland, Washington, and New Hampshire who have already issued injunctions blocking Trump from enforcing the birthright citizenship executive order. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has said that U.S. drone flights over Mexican territory were part of a collaboration with the U.S. government. In a press conference, she said there was nothing illegal about it. According to Sheinbaum, these flights are a part of a coordinated operation between the governments and have been done for many years. She added that the legal framework of international agencies that fight crime in Mexico was being evaluated. According to reports, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau feels Ukraine must be part of any talks about its future. This statement came after US and Russian officials held high-level talks in Saudi Arabia that excluded Ukraine. Trudeau stated, saying it's a fundamental principle for Canada and the vast majority of our allies. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.